At the NDAA, I had planned to discuss our work to ensure American service members can protect our nation and secure peace for the United States. But unfortunately, the inexplicable passivity and weakness of local leaders in our country has denied some citizens peace and security right here at home. Here we are in Congress, equipping our armed forces to protect the homeland. Yet some local leaders have apparently felt it would be too politically incorrect to do their jobs and keep the peace. It's now been 22 days since radical demonstrators seized control of several blocks of downtown Seattle, drove the police out of a precinct, and declared an autonomous zone which the mob itself would rule. It's worth pausing to consider how the mainstream media and leading Democrats might have reacted if Tea Party protesters in 2009 had forcibly created a breakaway zone within a major city and barred the actual authorities from entering. Somehow, I'm skeptical the press would have bent over backwards to find a sympathetic light. Somehow, I doubt these same politicians would have felt compelled to curry favor with the occupiers or flirt with their demands. But we're talking about the American left in 2020. So instead, what we get is a major newspaper lavishing praise on the, quote, liberated streets, and a mayor and local government that have expressly declined to restore order and the equal protection of the law. The mob has gotten its way. There have been numerous shootings in this lawless place. About a week ago, a 19-year-old was shot and killed. Last weekend, yet another shooting. A 16-year-old is dead and a 14-year-old was injured. Some reports suggest these two boys were shot by a self-appointed security squad. These are miscellaneous citizens who roamed the area with guns drawn after the occupiers drove the real police out. We're talking about Seattle, Washington, in the United States of America. Madam President, the rule of law cannot fade in and out with fashions of the radical left. No leaders should have sacrificed small businesses to riots and mobs a few weeks back. And no leader should let threats or left-wing jargon persuade them to tolerate occupations for weeks on end. I understand that just this morning, Seattle's mayor finally released a new order that at least empowered police to bring an end to this. So let's hope the rule of law finally prevails. On an entirely different matter, the Senate has indeed turned to what will be the 60th annual National Defense Authorization Act. And if you look at world news, it would appear we've done so not a moment too soon. After months of threats, President Xi and the Chinese Communist Party finally delivered the punch in the mouth to the city of Hong Kong that they're calling a national security law. As I and others have warned for months, it tramples all over the freedoms and autonomy that have set Hong Kong apart. Today marks the 23rd anniversary of Hong Kong's handover from the United Kingdom. Normally, this anniversary would have occasioned peaceful demonstrations. Instead, the new law has brought scores of arrests and boasts from local authorities about how many peaceful demonstrators they've jailed. New harsh penalties for Hong Kongers for new and vague offenses. New authorities for Beijing to intervene at will. It appears to directly violate China's international promises and effectively end the one country, two systems policy. I've discussed at some length the specific consequences China will face for this. I'll continue to discuss them in the future. This same week, we received new confirmation that China's ethnic cleansing campaign against the Uyghur people in Xinjiang includes forced abortions, forced birth control, and state-enforced sterilizations on a systematic scale. All this, in addition to the international provocations that China has only stepped up during this pandemic, which they help worsen against Taiwan, against India, against the Philippines, and so on. And China is not our only adversary occupying the spotlight. Recent days have intensified questions about Russia's negative role in the Middle East. I've long warned that Russia and other adversaries will exploit any American passivity or retreat from this important region, whether in Syria or Afghanistan. The question is whether we will stand our ground and exert our influence or allow Iran, Russia, and terrorists to literally push us out of the region. Sadly, as the Senate turns to the NDAA and the need to continue making swift progress on the national defense strategy is staring us plain in the face. Fortunately, Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reid, and our colleagues on the Armed Services Committee have put forward a bill that rises to the challenge. The bill establishes the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. It lays out a clear vision for making our Pacific Joint Force more adaptable and our commitments to regional partners more feasible. Smarter basing for forward deployed Americans, more supplies and equipment pre-positioned. It will encourage more streamlined technology so that from weapons platforms to information security, America and its allies in China, in China's backyard, stand ready to counter aggression altogether. This NDAA authorizes full funding for the European Deterrence Initiative, doubling down on our NATO alliances as we check the worst impulses of Putin's Russia. The bill will further limit the information Putin gets pertaining to missile defense, bring more focus on tracking Russian support for terrorist proxies and despotic regimes, and renew our commitment to have U.S. forces support, train, and keep watch alongside our partners. But it isn't enough to check our adversaries today. We also need to outrun them toward the future. So this legislation will also support critical research to help us secure a decisive edge in everything from hypersonic weapons to 5G communications. Threats to our nation are pulling American service members in all directions. Fortunately, this NDAA has all of their backs. Now, Madam President, on one final matter, while the Senate maintains the serious approach that builds bipartisan successes like the CARES Act and the Great American Outdoors Act, the House Democrats appear addicted to pointless political theater. Well, our absentee neighbors have finally arrived back in the Capitol, and they've wasted no time resuming old tricks. The Speaker has chosen to spend the House's time this week on a multi-thousand-page cousin of the Green New Deal, masquerading as a highway bill. You don't have to take my word for it. The chair of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee said so. He said, quote, "This is the application of the principles of the Green New Deal." And he's right, because here are the 4 pillars of the Green New Deal. Number 1, spend an insane amount of money. Number 2, check every far-left ideological box. Number 3, propose bad policies. And 4, forget about making law from the very beginning so you can legislate in a world of pure fantasy. Pure fantasy. Well, check, 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 check. This so-called infrastructure bill would siphon billions in funding from actual infrastructure to funnel into climate change policies. By putting a huge thumb on the scale for mass transit and electric vehicles, it revives the old Obama-Biden focus on disproportionately helping major metro areas, leaving less for the rest of our country. No wonder it came out of committee in the House on a purely partisan vote. No wonder the White House has declared it not a serious proposal and made clear this will never become law. So naturally, this nonsense is not going anywhere in the Senate. It will just join the list of absurd House proposals that were only drawn up to show fealty to the radical left. Here in the Senate, we'll keep at the serious work of our nation.